So I want to talk to you today about bringing unforgettable characters to life, about the intersection of creativity and film, about what it actually takes to create something that people remember, that people talk about, that people carry with them long after the credits roll. And before I get into the techniques, before I show you the proof stacks, before I break down the patterns I've discovered across hundreds of hours studying the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, let me tell you how I started thinking about this. Because this isn't just theory. This isn't just me synthesizing information from books and articles. This is something I discovered by going deep, by obsessing over the work of masters, by watching the same films dozens of times and reading every interview I could find. I was watching an interview with Hayao Miyazaki, the legendary animator behind Studio Ghibli. And if you don't know Miyazaki, you need to stop what you're doing right now and watch Spirited Away, or My Neighbor Totoro, or Princess Mononoke. These films are masterpieces. They're beloved around the world. They create characters that children and adults both connect with on a deep level. And someone in this interview asks Miyazaki why his characters feel so real, so alive, even though they're hand-drawn animations. Even though they're literally just lines on paper that have been photographed frame by frame. How do they have so much life? How do they feel more real than characters in films with actual human actors? And Miyazaki says something that just stopped me cold. He says, I don't create characters, I discover them. They already exist somewhere. My job is to find them and bring them into the world. Now, at first this sounds like artistic nonsense, right? Like some mystical creative talk that doesn't mean anything practical. The kind of thing artists say in interviews that sounds profound but doesn't actually help you if you're trying to learn the craft. I'd heard a lot of that kind of talk over the years, and usually I just dismiss it. But then I started looking at his work more carefully. I started studying how he actually builds these characters. I watched documentaries about his process. I read his essays. I looked at his notebooks full of sketches and observations, and I realized, wait, this isn't mystical at all. This is a technique, this is a process, and it's something you can learn, because here's what Miyazaki actually does. He doesn't start with a concept or an archetype or a role that needs to be filled in the story. He doesn't say, okay, I need a hero, so let me create a hero character. He doesn't work from the outside in. He works from the inside out. He starts with observation, real observation of real people. He watches how children move, how they run, how they fall, how they get back up. He watches how old women sit, how they hold their hands, how they laugh. He watches teenagers fidget when they're nervous. He watches how people eat, how they sleep, how they interact with animals and nature. And he fills notebooks with these observations, not just quick sketches, detailed studies, hundreds of pages of just watching human behavior and capturing it on paper. There's a documentary where they show you these notebooks, and it's incredible. Page after page of hands in different positions, eyes expressing different emotions. Jeeper. The way fabric moves when someone walks. And then, when he creates a character for a film, he's not making something up out of thin air. He's synthesizing everything he's observed. He's taking real human truth, real human movement, real human emotion, and expressing it through animation. That's why his characters feel so alive. Because they're not invented. They're built from life. They're built from truth. And once I saw this pattern with Miyazaki, I started seeing it everywhere. With every great filmmaker, every great storyteller, every creator who made characters we can't forget. They all do some version of this. They all start with observation. They all start with truth. Let me show you what I mean. Martin Scorsese talked about character creation in an interview from 1976. He's just made Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. And if you haven't seen Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle is one of the most unforgettable characters in cinema history. Disturbing, complex, tragic, real. When you watch that film, you believe this person exists. You believe you can meet him on the street. And someone asked Scorsese in this interview how he created Travis Bickle. How did you come up with this character? And Scorsese says something really simple. He says, I didn't create him. I knew guys like him. I grew up around guys like him in New York. I just had to be honest about what I'd seen. He talks about growing up in Little Italy, about the guys he knew who came back from Vietnam, about the loneliness and isolation and rage he witnessed. He didn't invent Travis Bickle, he remembered Travis Bickle. He took real people he'd known and real emotions he'd witnessed, and he channeled that into the character. Then in 1990, after Goodfellas, someone asked him the same kind of question. How do you create these vivid gangster characters? How do you make them feel so real? And Scorsese says, I'm not inventing these people, I'm remembering them. I grew up around wise guys, I watched them. I listened to them, I'm just being truthful about the world I came from. He talks about how he and Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote the book Wise Guy that Goodfellas is based on, would sit and talk for hours about specific real people they knew. The way they talked, the way they moved, their sense of humor, their violence, their loyalty, and their betrayals, all of it came from real observation. Then in 2019, after The Irishman, he's in his late 70s at this point, he's made dozens of films, he's one of the most celebrated directors in history, and someone asks him about creating memorable characters, and you know what he says? The exact same thing. He says, you have to start with truth. You have to start with real human behavior. Everything else is decoration. 1976, 1990, 2019, 43 years. Same principle, that's a proof stack. See, the secret to unforgettable characters isn't imagination in the way most people think about imagination. It's not about making things up. It's not about being clever or creative in the abstract. It's about observation. It's about truth. It's about taking real human complexity and putting it on screen in a way that feels honest. And this is so important because I think a lot of people misunderstand what creativity actually is. I think creativity means inventing things that don't exist. Geez, they think it means being original in the sense of creating something from nothing, but that's not how it works. Not with the greatest creators. The greatest creators are great observers. They're great at seeing what's already there. They're great at noticing details that other people miss, and then they're great at synthesizing those observations into something that feels both real and heightened at the same time. Now, let me break down the actual techniques, because this is learnable. This is something you can practice and get better at. You don't have to be born with some mystical creative gift. You have to be willing to look at the world carefully and honestly. You have to be willing to do the work. Technique number 1, the contradiction method. Real people are contradictory. We're not consistent. We're not one thing. We contain multitudes. As Walt Whitman said, we're capable of kindness and cruelty. We're strong in some ways and weak in others. We say one thing and do another. But we believe we're good people even when we do bad things. And the characters we remember most, the characters that feel most real, are the ones who embody that contradiction. The ones who aren't simple or clean or easy to understand. Think about Tony Soprano. This is maybe the best example of contradiction in a character ever put on screen. Tony is a brutal mobster who has panic attacks. He kills people without hesitation and then feeds ducks in his pool and cries when they fly away. He's a terrible father in many ways and also deeply loves his children. He's terrifying and vulnerable at the same time. He's capable of extreme violence and extreme tenderness, often in the same episode, sometimes in the same scene. And that contradiction is what makes him unforgettable, because it makes him real, because real people are exactly like that. Real people contain opposites. Or think about Michael Corleone in The Godfather. When we first meet him, he's the good son. He's the war hero. He's the one who doesn't want anything to do with the family business. He's going to be different. He's going to be legitimate. He tells Kay, that's my family, not me. And then, step by step, decision by decision, choice by choice, he becomes more ruthless than his father ever was. He becomes the thing he said he would never become. And the tragedy of the character, the power of the character, is in that contradiction. Contradiction between who he wanted to be and who he actually became. David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, talks about this in multiple interviews over the years. And I want to show you the proof stack here because it's so clear. In an interview from 1999, right when The Sopranos was first airing, Chase says, I never wanted Tony to be just a gangster or just a family man. I wanted him to be both, fully, at the same time, even when those things contradict each other, especially when those things contradict each other. Then in 2007, after the show was ended, someone asked him what made Tony such a compelling character. And Chase says the contradictions. The fact that he could be brutal and sensitive, that he could order a murder and then worry about his daughter's college applications. Real people are contradictory. So Tony had to be contradictory. Then in 2019, he's being interviewed about the show's legacy, and he says, the key to character is embracing contradiction, not explaining it away, not resolving it, letting it exist. 20 years, same idea. That's a proof stack. And this is so important because I think a lot of writers, a lot of filmmakers, especially when they're starting out, they want their characters to make sense. They want them to be consistent. They want their actions to follow logically from their personality and their beliefs. But real people don't work that way. Real people are inconsistent. Real people surprise themselves. Real people do things that contradict their stated values all the time. And when you embrace that in your characters, when you let them be contradictory, they come alive. They become unpredictable. They become interesting. There's a scene in The Sopranos, I think it's in season 2, where Tony is in therapy with Dr. Melfi, and he's talking about the ducks that were in his pool, and he starts crying. This mobster, who we've seen commit terrible acts of violence, is crying about ducks. And it's one of the most powerful scenes in the show because it's so contradictory, because it reveals something real about the character that we wouldn't expect. That's what contradiction does. It creates surprise, it creates depth, it creates reality. Technique number 2, the specificity principle. General characters are forgettable, specific characters are unforgettable. This is one of the most important lessons in all of storytelling, and it applies to everything, not just characters, but it's especially important for characters. When you make a character specific, when you give them particular tastes and opinions and habits and obsessions, they become real in a way that general characters never can. Quentin Tarantino understands this better than almost anyone. His characters don't just like music. They have specific opinions about specific songs. They'll argue about whether a song is good or bad. They'll reference specific albums. They'll have whole theories about musicians and genres. His characters don't just eat. They have philosophies about food. They have opinions about what makes a good burger versus a bad burger. They have preferences about breakfast cereal. They have rituals around how they drink coffee. His characters don't just talk. They have their own rhythms, their own vocabulary, their own obsessions. They care deeply about things that have nothing to do with the plot. And that's exactly what makes them memorable. Think about Jules in Pulp Fiction. He quotes the Bible before he kills people. That specific detail, that particular choice tells you so much about the character. It's weird, it's contradictory, it's specific, and it's unforgettable. Or think about the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs. These criminals sitting around arguing about the meaning of Madonna's Like a Virgin. It has nothing to do with the heist they're about to pull. It's just them talking, being specific, revealing themselves to their opinions and their humor and their interactions. In an interview from 1994, right after Pulp Fiction came out and became a cultural phenomenon, Tarantino talks about this approach. He says, "I give my characters things to care about that have nothing to do with the plot. Because that's how real people are. Real people have opinions about everything. They have obsessions. They have theories. And when you put that in your characters, they feel real." He talks about how he listens to real conversations in restaurants and bars, how he pays attention to the way people actually talk, the digressions, the tangents, the weird specific things they get passionate about, and he puts that in his scripts. Then in 2009, someone asked him about creating memorable dialogue, and he says, "Make them specific. Give them obsessions. Let them care deeply about things that don't matter to the story, because that's what makes them human." And then in 2019, he's still saying the same thing. He says, "The more specific you make them, the more universal they become," which sounds paradoxical, but it's true. The more specific and particular your characters are, the more real they feel, and the more people connect with them. 1994, 2009, 2019, 25 years, same technique. That's a proof stack. And here's why this works. When you make a character specific, when you give them weird little obsessions and opinions and habits, you're doing what Miyazaki does. You're building from observation, because all those specific details come from real life. They come from people you've watched, conversations you've overheard, moments you've noticed. You can't make up good specific details. You have to observe them. You have to notice them in the world. And then you have to have the courage to put them in your work, even when they seem random or irrelevant to the plot. I was watching an interview with the Coen Brothers, Joel and Ethan Coen, and they talk about this too. They say that when they're writing a character, they often start with a specific real person they know or have observed. Not that they're portraying that person exactly, but they use them as a starting point. They borrow mannerisms, speech patterns, specific behaviors, and then they start adding other specific details. Maybe this character always wears a particular kind of hat. Maybe they have a specific way of holding a cigarette. Maybe they always order the same drink. These details seem small, but they accumulate. They build up into a complete picture of a person. There's a great example of this in No Country for Old Men. The character of Anton Chigurh, the hitman played by Javier Bardem, he has this very specific haircut. He has this specific way of speaking, very calm and measured. He has this specific weapon he uses, the captive bolt pistol. He has this habit of flipping a coin to make decisions. None of these things are essential to the plot in the sense that you could tell the same basic story without them. But they're essential to the character. They make him specific, they make him real, they make him terrifying in a very particular way. And the Coen Brothers have talked about how they developed that character from observations of real people, from photographs, from their own imaginations, working with specific details rather than general concepts. Technique number 3, the pressure test. You discover who a character really is by putting them under pressure, by forcing them to make difficult choices, by taking away their options until they have to reveal themselves. This is one of the oldest principles in storytelling, but it's still one of the most important. And I think a lot of writers don't push hard enough. They don't put enough pressure on their characters. They let them off easy. The Coen Brothers are absolute masters of this. They create characters and then they systematically torture them. They put them in impossible situations. They force them to make choice after choice, each one harder than the last. And the characters reveal themselves through how they respond. In an interview from 2007, Joel Coen says, "We don't really know our characters until we've tortured them a little bit. Until we've seen how they react when everything goes wrong, when they can't just coast on their usual behaviors." And if you look at their films, that's exactly what they do. They take ordinary people, often not particularly heroic or special people, and they put extraordinary pressure on them, and that pressure reveals character. Think about No Country for Old Men. Llewellyn Moss is a welder, a regular guy hunting antelope in the desert. He finds $2 million at a drug deal gone wrong, and from that moment, the pressure never stops. He's hunted by Anton Chigurh, one of the most terrifying villains in cinema. His wife is in danger. He's injured. He's running out of options. And every decision he makes reveals character. His decision to take the money in the first place reveals something about him. His decision to go back and bring water to the dying man reveals something else. His stubborn refusal to quit, to give up the money even when it would save his life, that reveals his pride and his determination, and ultimately his fatal flaw. We learn who Llewellyn Moss really is. Not through exposition or dialogue where he explains himself, but through watching him make increasingly difficult choices under increasing pressure. Or, think about a serious man. Larry Gopnik is a physics professor. He's trying to be a good person. He's trying to do the right thing, and then everything in his life starts falling apart. His wife wants a divorce. His brother is in trouble. His son is misbehaving. His tenure case is in jeopardy. Someone is trying to bribe him. Someone is slandering him. The pressure just keeps building. And Larry keeps trying to find answers, trying to find meaning, trying to understand why this is happening to him. And his responses, his attempts to cope, his growing desperation, his conversations with rabbis seeking wisdom, all of that reveals who he is. By the end of the film, we know Larry Gopnik completely. Not because anyone told us who he is, but because we watched him under sustained, intense pressure. This is what separates unforgettable characters from forgettable ones. Forgettable characters tell you who they are. They announce their values and their goals and their personality traits. Unforgettable characters show you who they are through their choices under pressure. And here's the key, the pressure has to be real. It has to matter. The stakes have to be high. If your character can just walk away, if there's an easy solution they're not taking for no good reason, the audience will check out. But if the pressure is genuine, if the choices are truly difficult, if there's no good option, only less bad options, then you've got something. Paul Thomas Anderson understands this. In There Will Be Blood, Daniel Plainview is under constant pressure. He's trying to build his oil empire. He's dealing with competition, with the church, with his own ambition and greed, and the pressure keeps mounting until it finally breaks him. In an interview, Anderson talks about how he approaches character through conflict and pressure. He says, "I want to see what happens when you push someone to their limit, when you take away the comfortable middle ground and force them to extremes." And you see this in all his films. In The Master, Freddie Quell is under pressure to conform, to control his impulses, to become someone different. In Phantom Thread, Reynolds Woodcock is under pressure when his carefully controlled life is disrupted. The pressure reveals who these people really are underneath their carefully constructed personas. Technique number 4, the physical life. Great actors and great filmmakers know that character isn't just psychology. It's not just what's happening in someone's head, it's physical. It's how someone moves, how they hold themselves, how they occupy space, how they interact with objects and environments. This is something that's easier to show in film than to describe in words, but it's absolutely crucial, and the best actors and directors are obsessive about getting this right. Daniel Day-Lewis is famous for this approach. He doesn't just understand his characters mentally and emotionally, he understands them physically. He knows how they walk, how they breathe, how they sit, how they stand, how they hold a cup of coffee or light a cigarette. For My Left Foot, where he played Christy Brown, a man with cerebral palsy who could only control his left foot, Day-Lewis stayed in a wheelchair for the entire shoot. He had crew members carry him around. He learned to paint and write with his foot. He lived the physical reality of the character. For Lincoln, he maintained Lincoln's posture and voice even when the cameras weren't rolling. He studied photographs and descriptions of how Lincoln moved, how he sat in chairs, how he walked with his slightly awkward gait. For There Will Be Blood, he developed Daniel Plainview's physical presence before he ever spoke a line of dialogue. The way Plainview walks, that distinctive stride, the way he uses his hands when he talks, the way he stands when he's trying to intimidate someone, all of that was carefully developed. In an interview from 2008, Day-Lewis says, "A character isn't complete until I know how they move through the world, until their body tells the same story as their words, maybe even more so, because bodies don't lie the way words do." And you see this in Paul Thomas Anderson's direction too. He doesn't just film performances, he films bodies in space. He pays attention to physical details. He gives actors time and space to develop the physical life of their characters. Think about the opening of There Will Be Blood. The first 15 minutes of that film have almost no dialogue. But you understand everything about Daniel Plainview from watching him work. Watching him dig in the mine, watching him fall and break his leg, and then crawl out of the mine shaft, dragging himself with his arms, watching him climb a ladder holding a sample of silver, injured, in pain, but determined. The physical life tells the story. The body reveals character in a way that dialogue never could. Or think about Joaquin Phoenix in The Master, the way Freddie Quell holds his body, all tension and suppressed violence. The way he walks, slightly hunched, ready to fight. The way he drinks, desperately, compulsively. Phoenix developed all of that physically. It's not in the script exactly, it's in how he embodies the character. Coen Brothers pay attention to this too. Think about the physicality of their characters. The way Jeff Bridges as the dude in The Big Lebowski moves through the world, so relaxed and casual. Or the way Javier Bardem as Anton Chigurh moves, so controlled and deliberate and menacing. These aren't accidents. These are choices. These are aspects of character that are developed as carefully as the dialogue or the backstory. And this is something you can work on as a filmmaker or as an actor. You can study how real people move. You can notice physical details. You can think about how your character's physical life reveals their inner life. Does your character move quickly or slowly? Do they take up space confidently, or do they try to make themselves small? Do they make eye contact or avoid it? Do they touch people when they talk or keep their distance? Do they fidget or stay still? All of these physical choices tell us something about who the character is. And the more specific and considered these choices are, the more real the character becomes. Technique number 5, the iceberg theory. This comes from Ernest Hemingway originally. He had this theory about writing where he said, you should know 10 times as much about your story and your characters as you actually put on the page. The idea is that what you show is only 10% of what you need to know. The other 90% is underwater. It's the backstory, the history, the inner life that you as the creator know, but don't necessarily show. And Hemingway's argument was that this hidden 90% strengthens the 10% you do show. It adds weight. It adds depth. It makes the visible part feel more real because there's so much underneath supporting it. The best filmmakers understand this instinctively. They develop extensive backstories for their characters, even if none of that backstory makes it into the film. Because knowing that history changes everything, it changes how the actor plays the character, it changes what the filmmaker chooses to show. It adds layers that the audience might not consciously notice, but they feel. Michael Mann is obsessive about this. He's famous for having actors develop incredibly detailed biographies for their characters. Pages and pages of history and detail that will never be explicitly stated in the film, but that inform every moment. For Heat, which is one of the great crime films ever made, Mann had Al Pacino and Robert De Niro develop full backstories for their characters. Vincent Hanna, the detective played by Pacino, and Neil McCauley, the criminal played by De Niro. Where did they grow up? What were their fathers like? What was their first arrest? What relationships have they had? What traumas have they experienced? What are they afraid of? What do they want more than anything? Most of that never appears in the film directly, but it's there. You feel it. When Pacino plays Hannah, you sense the history. You sense the weight of experience. When De Niro plays McCauley, you sense the discipline and the loneliness and the past that shaped him. In an interview from 1995, right after he came out, Mann talks about this approach. He says, you have to know everything about your characters, even if you only show a fraction of it, because that knowledge informs every moment, every line reading, every gesture, every choice. And then in 2006, he's talking about his process again, and he says the same thing. He says, I work with actors to build complete human beings, not just characters in a script. We develop their entire lives, and then we pick the moments from those lives to show in the film, 11 years apart. Same approach. That's a proof stack. And this is something you can do right now, today, whether you're writing a script or developing a character or preparing to direct or act. Take your character and write their biography. Write 10 pages, write 20 pages, go deep. Where were they born? What was their childhood like? What was their relationship with their parents? Did they have siblings? What was school like for them? What was their first kiss, their first heartbreak? What jobs have they had? What failures have they experienced? What are they ashamed of? What are they proud of? What do they want? What are they afraid of? You'll never use most of this directly. But when you sit down to write a scene with that character, you'll write it differently. Because you'll know who they really are, you'll know their history, you'll know what they're carrying with them, and that knowledge will seep into everything, into the dialogue, into the choices they make, into how the actor plays them, into how the audience receives them. There's a scene in Heat, the famous coffee shop scene where Pacino and De Niro sit across from each other and talk. It's one of the great scenes in cinema, and what makes it so powerful is that you feel the weight of two complete human beings sitting across from each other. You feel their history, their intelligence, their mutual respect, their understanding that in different circumstances they might have been friends. None of that is explained. It's just there. And it's there because Mann and the actors did the work. They built the iceberg. They know the 90% we don't see. And that makes the 10% we do see unforgettable. Now let me connect all of this. Because these 5 techniques aren't separate. They're not a checklist where you do one and then move on to the next. They work together. They build on each other. They create a complete approach to character. You start with observation. You watch real people. You notice contradictions, specific details, physical behaviors. You collect all of this. You fill notebooks like Miyazaki, you listen to conversations like Tarantino, you study faces and bodies and movements. Then you build your character from those observations. You embrace contradictions. Go! You don't try to make them simple or easy to understand. You let them be complex and sometimes self-contradicting like real people. You add specificity. You give them particular tastes, opinions, habits, obsessions, things that have nothing to do with the plot, but everything to do with who they are as a person. You make them specific enough that they feel like a real individual, not a type. You develop their physical life. You think about how they move, how they occupy space, how their body expresses their inner life. You make choices about posture and gesture and rhythm. You build the iceberg. You develop extensive backstory, complete biographies, histories that explain who they are and how they got that way. You know 10 times more about them than you'll ever show. And then you put them under pressure. You force them to make difficult choices. You take away the easy options. You create situations where they have to reveal themselves through action. And those choices made under pressure, informed by all the work you've done to understand who they really are, those choices reveal character in a way that feels authentic and inevitable and surprising all at the same time. This is how you create unforgettable characters. This is how you bring creativity and film together in a way that resonates with audiences deeply and permanently. This is how you make something that lasts. And here's what I love about studying these filmmakers. What really gets me excited about doing this research and making these videos. They all discovered the same principles independently. They all arrived at the same truth through their own paths. Miyazaki in Japan, working in animation. Scorsese in New York, working in gritty crime dramas and character studies. The Coen Brothers in Minnesota, working in darkly comic neo-noirs. Tarantino in Los Angeles, working in postmodern genre films. Paul Thomas Anderson, working in epic character studies. Michael Mann, working in crime thrillers. They're working in different genres, different styles, different decades, different countries even, but they all arrived at the same fundamental truth about character. Great characters come from observation. They come from truth. They come from contradiction. They come from specificity. They come from pressure. They come from depth. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. That's something real. That's something you can learn and apply. And that's what gives me so much hope and excitement about this. Because it means this isn't magic. This isn't some mystical gift that you either have or you don't. This is craft. This is technique. This is something you can study and practice and get better at. You don't have to be a genius. You have to be willing to look at the world carefully. You have to be willing to notice things. You have to be willing to tell the truth about what you see. You have to be willing to do the work. So if you're working on a film, if you're writing a script, if you're developing characters, if you're trying to create something that people will remember, start here. Start with these 5 techniques. Start with observation. Go out into the world. Watch people. Really watch them. Notice how they move, how they talk, how they interact. Notice the contradictions. Notice the specific details. Fill notebooks, collect moments, embrace contradiction in your characters. Don't try to make them simple or consistent. Let them be complex. Let them surprise you. Let them do things that contradict what we think we know about them. Bad specificity. Give your characters particular tastes and opinions and habits. Make them care about weird things. Give them obsessions. Make them specific enough that they feel like a real person, not a type or an archetype. Develop their physical life. Think about how they move, how they hold themselves, how their body expresses their inner life. Work with actors on this. Study it. Practice it. Build the iceberg. Write extensive backstories, develop complete biographies, know everything about your characters, even if you only show a fraction of it, and then put them under real pressure. Force them to make hard choices. Take away the easy options. Let them reveal themselves through action. Practice these techniques. Study how the masters use them. Watch films with these principles in mind. Notice how characters are built, moment by moment, choice by choice, and then make them your own. Adapt them to your own style, your own voice, your own stories, because the world doesn't need more generic characters. The world doesn't need more archetypes or stereotypes or cliches. The world doesn't need more characters who are just there to serve the plot or deliver exposition or represent an idea. The world needs unforgettable characters, characters that feel real, characters that surprise us, characters that move us, characters that reveal something true about human nature, characters that we think about long after the film is over, characters that we talk about, characters that we remember. And you can create those characters. You have everything you need. You just have to look at the world around you. You just have to be honest about what you see. You just have to be willing to do the work. That's the secret. That's where all these great filmmakers have discovered, each in their own way. Observation, truth, specificity, contradiction, depth, pressure. That's it. That's the formula, if there is a formula. And it works. It works across genres and styles and decades. It works in animation and live action. It works in big-budget Hollywood films and tiny independent productions. It works. So go do it. Go create unforgettable characters. Go bring them to life in a way that matters. Go make something that people will remember. And remember, this is just the beginning. These 5 techniques are foundational, but there's so much more to explore. Every filmmaker I've mentioned today has their own additional insights, their own variations on these themes, their own specific approaches that are worth studying. The more you study, the more you'll discover. The more you practice, the better you'll get. This is a lifelong process. Even the masters are still learning, still discovering, still pushing themselves to create characters that are more real, more complex, more unforgettable. That's what makes this so exciting. You're never done. You're never finished learning. Every film is an opportunity to go deeper, to understand more, to create something better. So keep watching films. Keep studying the masters. Keep practicing. Keep pushing yourself. Keep looking at the world with open eyes. Keep telling the truth about what you see. That's how you get better. That's how you create work that matters. That's how you bring unforgettable characters to life. Thanks for watching. If you found this valuable, subscribe to the Outlier Files. Check out the other episodes where we go deep on specific.